Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman arriving at the G20 summit in Osaka, a symbolic scene suggesting his acceptance as a leader, if not endorsement of his policies. Underneath the surface are unresolved human rights violations, including the brutal murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, the persecution of female activists and clerics advocating reforms. And now, another name is gaining prominence inside and outside of Saudi Arabia. His name is Salman al-Awdah, a renowned religious leader who is now in jail after political disagreements with the Saudi regime. He's now unable to speak to the press, but this week on Talk to Al Jazeera, we sit down with his son, Abdullah Alaoudh, a young dissident currently living in the US, to discuss Mohammed bin Salman, Jamal Khashoggi, and the fate of his father.
Dr. Abdullah Alaoudh, thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start by asking you about the situation in Saudi Arabia now. It's been almost 2 years since Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman ascended to power. Many consider him to be the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia. A lot of people in the West had pinned so much hope on this young reformist prince and his bold agenda, as they described it. 2 years have gone by. What has changed in Saudi Arabia?
The promise was to reform the social fabric in Saudi Arabia, was to diversify the Saudi economy, and to promote moderate Islam. What has been done is actually the opposite of all these three different aspects. Socially, the promise to reform was delivered through attacking the feminists, the women human rights defenders in Saudi Arabia.
But how can you say that if Mohammed bin Salman delivered by allowing women to drive?
That's an achievement that we have to respect, and I myself like that move. But at the same time, if you look at the fuller picture, what are the real reforms? What he wanted is to take credit for the call that demands the state to allow women to drive for the past few decades. So what he wanted was that to make a PR campaign to take credit for these demands, and did not want these campaigners, these human rights defenders in Saudi Arabia to surface and talk about other issues and other human rights issues. So he did like two targets in this crackdown. One, he targets those who could pose like a threat and asks for more human rights, and at the same time that will allow him to take credit and to try to convince the West that he was the one who was behind the allowing women to drive and allowing women to have some superficial reforms that we are having in the kingdom. The main issue, the male guardianship system, is not just still there. It's actually being more and more effective in dealing with the subjects.
But like you have, for example, in the United States now, Saudi Arabia for the first time has a female ambassador.
That's true, but look at this female ambassador and what has been done at the same time in Saudi Arabia. Like Lujain, Aziz, other names languish in jail because of the same of asking Saudi Arabia to adopt such a reform, to adopt a female ambassador, to have to empower women in politics.
So Mohammed bin Salman, how popular is he in Saudi Arabia?
Well, the thing is that in Saudi Arabia, you will never have a public poll that really can tell you the real, the real Saudi opinion and impression of the state and its leaders. But if you want to have at least a real impression of how the Saudi public feel about the state, you should look at the various segments of Saudi society. Look at, for example, the liberals, the feminists, the Shia, the Sunni, the Islamists, the different the women, men, you will find, the leaders of all these segments of Saudi society all have been either put in jail, silenced, intimidated, or threatened in one way or another. Even the tribal leaders in Saudi Arabia, even his own family.
The religious institution in Saudi Arabia has forever been criticized for being an extreme one that has given birth to what many would consider to be terrorist movements and organizations. Mohammed bin Salman promised to counter that. And we have seen many religious figures imprisoned. Do you think that he is being successful in that? Amongst those that are in prison are your father, Sheikh Salman al-Awdah, one of the most prominent religious figures in Saudi Arabia.
Well, what he has done in the past 2 years, 1 year and a half, is that he attacked the moderate voices of the kingdom, the voices that have been spearheading the campaign against extremism, terrorism in the kingdom. Even the state needed them to counter terrorism after 2001, and in the during the terrorism and terrorist attacks in 2004, 6, and after in Saudi Arabia. So, but why the state targeted them is because the state fear what they have in their package, the democratic discourse. While at the same time, the state that MBS that promised to curtail the religious establishment tried to curtail these moderate voices, while at the same time empowering the state-sponsored fatwas, the state-sponsored council, which is the Council of Senior Scholars in Saudi Arabia. That council is still issuing fatwa regularly. That council is still sponsored by the state, paid by the state.
Can you give me an example of what is wrong with this council?
Take the example of Salman al-Fawzan. Salman al-Fawzan is a very powerful person within that council.
He is a member of this.
Yes, he is an influential member actually of that council. He is very close to MBS. MBS visited him like last year, and MBS told him literally that he is like his father. So MBS implied that, well, his father, the king, is the head of the political power in Saudi Arabia. Salman al-Fawzan is the head of the religious power in Saudi Arabia. So that alliance is still effective. And who Salman al-Fawzan, and if you want to know who Salman al-Fawzan is, look at his fatwas. Salman al-Fawzan is the one who gave a fatwa like 1 month just before the killing of Khashoggi, not just allowing the state to kill dissidents, but urging the state to call dissidents under the Salafi and Wahhabi doctrine that those who disagree with the state are rebelling against religion, against God, and against the state.
So basically, dissidents should be charged with treason, is what he's saying.
With treasonous and also be executed because of their dissidence.
So he is somebody who is a significant religious figure that is still in his position and has influence, but on one hand, and at the same time you have somebody like Sheikh Salman al-Awdah who is in jail. And this for you is an example of
the fake campaign against extremism. He has been targeting the moderate voices and try to sell that to the West like if he is curtailing the religious establishment. He took advantage of a lot of people in the West not knowing the dynamics of the Saudi society and the dynamics within the religious figures, and try to sell that like if he is curtailing the religious establishment, but in fact he is curtailing the moderate voices that could ask for more democratic demands and have in their package the democratic discourse, but at the same time empowering those extremists who in return legitimize his own influence, his own rule.
Okay, tell me a bit about your father, Sheikh Salman al-Awdah. He is somebody who has millions of followers online on Twitter. He is somebody who traveled the Muslim world and even many other countries with significant Muslim populations, giving lectures and preaching and so forth. Why do you believe he was imprisoned? Tell me a bit about him.
MBS has been always obsessed with attacking those who have more popularity than his father. Like for my father, for example, has 14 million followers on Twitter. It's like double than what the king himself has on Twitter. So that signals one thing: popularity. Second, my father has what also the state lacks, which is both. While my father has the religious authority in his teaching and all that, he also has the he promotes the democratic discourse. He asks the state, like for example in 2011, he promoted and presented one of them. It's actually the most popular petition in Saudi history, which is the petition called toward a state of institutions and rights in Saudi Arabia, asking the state to transform into a constitutional monarchy where the minorities are protected, women are empowered, where the people are represented in an elected parliament in Saudi Arabia, where rights are guaranteed. So these elements.
So he's a religious democrat.
Exactly, and that's why they fear him the most. They fear this discourse because it is acceptable by the locals, it's very popular locally, and it's very acceptable internationally, and by even the large majority of the royal family itself. So that's why he's a threat.
Salman al-Awdah was given platforms on state-run television or media outlets or those close to it. How has Saudi media and those supporting Mohammed bin Salman been able to, between day and night, go from shining a light on him as an example of progressiveness to suddenly trying to convince the people that he is a foreign agent, a traitor, and somebody who wants harm to the kingdom and to his country?
That just proves the hypocrisy of their discourse. Take the example of the Saudi ambassador, the current Saudi ambassador to UAE, Turki al-Dakhil, who has written his master's dissertation on my father. He studied my father, and the title of his published book later was Salman al-Awdah from prison to enlightenment, and he presented my father as an icon of Islamic enlightenment in Saudi Arabia and in the Arab world. He is now, he's part of how the state really thinks about my father, that he is an icon of enlightenment, of moderate Islam, but also why the state fears him the most, because of that enlightenment, because of that moderate Islam. So that's another issue of why MBS is doing his moderate Islam campaign. Because those people, like my father, will really expose his discourse.
Okay, tell me what happened to your father. How was he arrested? How was he detained?
After the rift between Qatar and Saudi Arabia in 2017, my father tweeted that may Allah harmonize between the hearts of the leader for the best of their peoples. He did not mention names, and he did not mention even like the countries. Countries.
So it was just a tweet calling for unity.
Exactly.
General.
So few hours after that tweet, forces from state security showed up at the house. They did not. They refused to present any badges or any legal documents. Without any legal proceeding, they searched the house. They took my father away, and they said to my brothers that it's gonna be just a few hours, and he will be back safe and sound. But what happened was not that. He was held incommunicado for 6 months. We heard about
without any legal duress, without being able to see him or speak to him.
Without any legal proceeding whatsoever.
Were you able to speak to him in those 6 months?
No, I was never able to speak to him even until now. So when after that, after the first 6 months, there was a leak about his hospitalization in prison. We tried to ask. Nobody responded to that. So we told the news. I told the news, and it went really viral at the time. So they, after that, they allowed some family visits, and during the family visits, we knew the horrible treatment that he faced during his imprisonment. And just remember, my father is the most popular figure in the kingdom, and he was treated like that. So just imagine those who are less known or even not known to the public or to the international media. What would they do? How would they treat such people?
So in those 6 months that he was held incommunicado, and the following months, Mohammed bin Salman was welcomed in Washington and in London and Paris and other places. How do you think that, what message does that send to the Saudi government on one hand, that they can continue doing this and get that international acknowledgement, but also is it encouraging to those who are calling for freedom and reform in Saudi Arabia, that while they're getting tortured or their icons are in jail, those who are essentially oppressing them are being celebrated?
It's actually very hurtful. Yeah, it's very hurtful for a lot of people to see. I mean, the international media, up until the moment of killing Jamal Khashoggi, was trying to promote and to portray the Crown Prince as the one who pushed for reforms, who curtails the religious establishment, who promotes the moderate Islam, and who will diversify the Saudi economy. They ignored and neglected the human rights. They neglected how the internal dynamics of Saudi Arabia looked like. They needed like a very long time to realize, and even now there are some media campaigns that really still buy the reformer kind of campaign and PR.
We speak of Jamal Khashoggi. You knew Jamal Khashoggi. What do you think his death has done to shine a light on the human rights violations and crimes that are taking place in Saudi Arabia?
Well, the Khashoggi killing was horrible, but it was a wake-up call for the Saudi public, which I care about more than anything, and for the international media, for the international community. The case of Khashoggi is actually representative of the human rights cases in Saudi Arabia. Those who killed Jamal Khashoggi at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul are still treating the voices that have similar concerns, those who have a similar discourse of Jamal Khashoggi, rahimahullah. So, I mean, the same minds that treated Jamal Khashoggi with brutality, with gruesome killing, are still torturing women human rights defenders, feminists, human rights defenders, the moderate Muslims, and the economists in Saudi Arabia. Those who killed Jamal Khashoggi are treating the prisoners in jail.
Do you know why? You have, after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, you had President Trump say that, am I going to really sacrifice billions of dollars worth of deals for the life of one person who wasn't even an American, as he had said it, right? And this is what it comes down to, really. We can talk about, I mean, you as somebody who, and I want to get into a bit about your own history and what you're looking to do now. You can talk about human rights, and you can aspire to have Western countries adopt your campaigns and your causes, but in reality, it's about money and it's about political influence, no?
If they want to think like realistically and think they want to have a real alliance with Saudi Arabia, they should not put the eggs in the basket of MBS. For one thing, MBS is not Saudi Arabia. MBS is not the history of Saudi Arabia. MBS is not his own royal family. MBS is not the Saudi public. So if you want to really establish a real alliance with Saudi Arabia, if you want to make sure that you have a stable relationship, if you want to have a long-term alliance, you have to establish that with the Saudi public, who will be there forever, with the Saudi institutions, with even the Saudi royal family, who at one point they agreed to transform into a constitutional monarchy. So that's why MBS came to power to kill that call, to kill that cause, and to just abort the demands toward more liberties and freedom in Saudi Arabia.
We've seen dissidents like Jamal Khashoggi and what has happened to them, either killed or some have been essentially renditioned, forcibly kidnapped from countries and back to Saudi Arabia. You are now not only a significant figure because of your father and maybe being a voice for him whilst he's being silent, but also because of your history of writing in Saudi media and calling for reforms. What is your message, and are you not worried and concerned for your own safety?
There is always concern, but the larger fear is not for myself, but for the Saudi future, for my society's future, meaning to have basic liberties, elections in Saudi Arabia where the people is represented, where the rights are protected, and that and only that can protect the future and the unity, the current unity of Saudi Arabia. And those who care, those who do not care about human rights in Saudi Arabia, they should care about their own strategic interests. And the strategic interests will only be dealt with by the Saudi institutions and the Saudi public.
So the Saudi Attorney General, who the government actually ironically sent to Turkey to investigate the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, has requested that the death penalty be put, essentially that your father's Sheikh Salman al-Awdah be put to death. Do you think that this death penalty will be executed?
Well, did we ever think that those who were sent to the Saudi consulate in Istanbul will execute that horrible, gruesome killing of my friend Jamal Khashoggi? If those who killed Jamal Khashoggi were just rogue operatives, well, the head of that rogue operation is still in force, is still administering and managing the situation in Saudi Arabia. So I really can't expect anything.
Finally, your father is imprisoned and therefore he's unable to deliver a message to his many followers, but also to those who understand his importance in Saudi society and in the region. What do you think his message would be if he was able to speak now from his jail cell?
I think the message is to protect the future of the peoples of the Gulf. His message is to defend the things that he has been defending all his life: the basic rights, basic liberties, the idea that Islam is moderate in nature. Islam is peaceful in nature, and just killing people, torturing others, putting people in jail arbitrarily will never help the message. We'll just send the counter message that the Islam that you are promoting is allowing extremist clerics to preach, and silencing feminists, and just abridging the human rights, basic human rights in Saudi Arabia. And that's not what Islam is. Islam is protecting human rights. Islam is promoting the moderate voices, and also Islam is empowering women.
Dr. Abdullah Salman al-Awdah, thank you very much for talking to us.